focus. Hey everybody, and welcome to the very last part of my Astrid series. It turns out it's harder to edit and upload a video when the cosplay you're working on is still being tweaked and finished on the day of the convention you're debuting it at. Who would have guessed? But now with Supernova Melbourne out of the way, I now have all the footage and now photos of the finished product for your viewing pleasure. Please stick around until the end of the video to hear my final evaluations for the build, as well as my overall advice and lesson learning mistakes that I'm going to give you that I learned during the process. And now with that out of the way, let's start painting.
We're going to do this from head to toe, so we're starting with the helm. After heat sealing the foam with a heat gun, I'm going to prime the foam with Flex Bond. After letting it dry after 3 coats, I begin the paint job. All the crevices between the scales were layered with a dark brown. I should also mention that these steps will be relatively similar between all armour pieces. Once that's done, we can now start painting our scales. Going by sections, I selected a few scales to be coated in purple. These were layered up 3 times, twice brushing one way, and the 3rd time brushing the opposite way. I will be eliminating most brush strokes this way. The rest of the scales are coated with the turquoise, layered 3 times in the same way. I will also be trying to stick strongly to the concept art. Now that we have our base colours, I'm going to single out a few of the blue scales and add a single layer of purple on top. Our scales for this part are done. Moving to the bottom of the visor, I'm going to be taking a tan paint and mixing it with a white to get a pale cream. This colour is going to be in the crevices. The original tan paint will be covering the scales. After 3 coats, this is the result. The crevices should be lighter than the scales. For the blue leather on the sides and the back, I'll be doing an alfoil technique. Firstly, I'm heating up the foam so that it is soft and bendy. Then I'm using a rolled up ball of aluminium foil and I'm going to press into the foam to create a janky texture within. To start our paint job on these sections, I'm covering the whole area with a dark turquoise. Mixing then a lighter turquoise, I brush on top in order to add dimension and really show the texture we made. And then an even lighter shade on top for good measure. The bolts on the sides are covered with a metallic silver acrylic paint. Now let's head to the horns. I've backtracked from lining the bottom with faux leather, so instead I'll be painting them with the same technique I used as the blue leather before. I dress them with a dark brown, dry brushing with a lighter brown, and then finally once again with an even lighter shade of brown on top. For the horns themselves, I'm going to be making a gradient. Firstly, I cover the entire horn with a yellow that I really like. This will be layered 3 times to get a nice coverage against the black foam. After drying, I'm going to mix a bit of orange into the chosen yellow paint and start brushing upwards from the bottom of the spike to about halfway. I'm trying to be random and sparse, releasing pressure on my brush as I go up so that that gradient effect is smoother and fluffier. Then I repeat this step with an even darker shade, but brushing up to 1/4 of the way this time. The holes for the eyes are lined with a saturated yellow acrylic. Once again, 3 coats for the best coverage. This is the complete look of the helmet without weathering and rivets at the back. I really wish I could have kept it this way, but I had to get it grubby. A mixture of black, dark brown, and a few drops of water is dabbed onto the scales, wiping off the excess so that you can still see the colour underneath. The blue leather and tan scales were dry brushed with a light brown. I ended up covering a few of those scales again with tan paint. And finally, the helm is completely finished. Oops, forgot the googly eye rivets. Just like the helm, the pauldrons were heat sealed and primed with Flex Bond 3 times. Using the same technique for the scales, I started with a brown coat within the crevices of the soldering, followed by a selection of purple scales, and then drowned the rest with turquoise paint. The leathering technique was used once more for the additional guard piece. I heated and pressed the foil into the foam until I was satisfied with the texture. For this paint job, however, I used a red-brown acrylic paint. I mixed in black to create 3 shades from a very dark brown to the original colour. To start, I saturated the foam with the very dark brown before lightly layering on the lighter shades after drying. This made a somewhat convincing leather look. The same method was used on the back of the piece after drying. To finish, I weathered with a dry brushing of brown paint, and with that, they're done. Next are the vambraces. These were heat sealed and primed with Flex Bond 3 times. To begin, I marked out the purple scales, filled in the blue, and overlaid a few with a purple coat. The thinner foam decals were given a quick white base before a cream tan layer on top. The small section above the thinner foam and the bottom of the braces were given a heat and press with foil. Then again, dark brown, brown and a lighter shade were added for the leather effect at the top, and a blue, turquoise and light blue shade for the same effect at the bottom. Starting on the spikes, I used 3 coats of yellow, then light orange, then a darker shade for depth. For the underside, I used both leathering methods to match the image for the back piece. The fake buckles and strap were layered with a coat of brown and embellished with silver. With some quick weathering, these are finally done. The gauntlets were heat sealed, primed with Flex Bond 3 times, and given a black base. You know the drill by now. Crevices with a brown, purple scales first, then turquoise, 3 times each. For the added extras, I painted the edges with a light brown, and then the inside layers with a darker brown. Everything was dry brushed with a brown for weathering, and then these were done. Time for the cuirass. Now that you have the gist of things, let's make this a tad bit faster. Crevices, purple scales, turquoise scales, purple highlights, blue leather, brown leather. I also attached the silver thing onto the back, and for the stringing I threaded brown embroidery thread through the foam to match. And then this piece is done. Now on this costume, Astrid has her iconic bird scales for the tassels. To make these, I will be doing a very cheap technique. Using air dry clay, I'm going to form and shape the bird skull, making sure it's as smooth as I would like. This is going to be my primary model. Once it is completely dry, I'm going to saturate it in hot glue, ensuring that the walls touch the base of my cutting mat. When it's cured, I'm able to slip the clay out of the glue, and now we have a very, very cheap mold. Taking some more air dry clay, I'm going to squish a small ball into the mold, pushing it into the sides and as far in as possible. Slowly, I'm going to bend the glue away to let the clay fall out. Because it's hot glue, it's not going to dry smooth, and so to fix the texture, I'm going to use my finger and some mortar to get rid of the lumps. This was repeated 7 times until I had 8 identical skulls. All I had to do then was paint them silver, add a black water wash over the top for depth, and then these were done. For the tassels themselves, we come to our first and only plasti-dipped pieces. The panels were coated with 1 spray before, again, brown, purple and turquoise paint were added for the scales. Next, I lined the edges with painter's tape to keep everything clean, and heated and textured them to my liking. I used the same painting techniques for the leather. For the triangles in the middle, I used the same masking and texture method as before. From here, the edges of the triangles and the bottom decals were threaded to match the design. I aligned each piece before very professionally hot gluing them together. The poly ends were heat sealed and primed with Flex Bond 3 times. To start, I coated the entire piece with black acrylic paint for a neutral base, and then once again with white. On top of this, I layered a light brown for the lower parts, and painted these scales with a creamy tan. Everything was then weathered with black and brown paint, along with threading around the side edge. These are now done. Moving on to the greaves. We start off with the same painting technique for the tan scales on the helm. Then I'm going to cover nearly the entire boot with murky Capri blue paint, and then painting the raised spikes yellow. These are going to get the same gradient treatment as the spikes on the braces and helm. The side spikes are then coated with a dirty gold and accented with a rich brown along the edge. Each of the thinner blue spikes are given a small silver shine up to match the art. I'm then going to add a bit of shading with a darker blue to the crevices, add some weathering to the tan scales, and then these are done. Now for the covers for the shoes. These were heat sealed and primed with Flex Bond 3 times. I started by layering a dark brown all over the piece. These scales were layered 3 times each with a bright yellow before a quick layer of orange while the last yellow coat was drying to create a golden hue. Lastly, these spike things were painted silver, along with some weathering. I stitched on the pieces using embroidery thread for a firm hold, and this was the final result. And that is all the painting completed. For my clothing underneath the armour, I've replaced the sleeves of a black shirt with brown ones, and created a simple neck cover where I made a pattern by cutting up an old turtleneck. The brown leather on the greaves were rectangular pieces of faux leather, sewn to the foam with a simple blanket stitch. Buckles for the pulley ends and press studs for the pauldrons were added. The vinyl I ended up using for the tassels was replaced with the same brown fabric I used for the sleeves. I also got rid of the Velcro idea for the cuirass entirely and replaced it with a brown zipper. With those alterations and everything done, here is the final result. I am so super thrilled with how this costume turned out. As this is my first armor build, I've learned a lot of new skills and techniques, as well as some not so good methods and ideas for the future. I hope to make many more of these builds in the future and possibly even enter competitions.
And now for my final evaluations and advice. First of all, let's start with the helmet. Because I made this piece before the movie was released, the spikes are far too small. They should be nice and large and long, just like Stormfly's. I'm also really devastated that I wasn't able to have the visor movable. If this is a feature that you would like to have in your cosplay, please be sure to take the thickness of the foam that you're using into account. The pauldrons that I made ended up being too thin for my shoulders, and I didn't have time to remake them. The tutorial I linked to is correct. The cuirass or chest plate is flat-chested because of how it's designed. This also didn't help accentuating my waist, which made me look like a block. The original design I wanted to go with was taking my female chest proportions into account. However, I ended up scrapping this because of how the concept art shows the chest plate. Feel free to actually take your chest into account for your cosplay. To change this, I could have added darts to the costume, and the best way to find out a tutorial on that is by looking online. There's many of them, you won't have a problem finding one. Overall, I am really happy with how this turned out, as it is my first attempt at an armor build. Of course, in an ideal world, I would have used Plasti Dip on every single piece and done that 3 times to have a smooth finish. I also would have used an airbrush if I had one instead of hand painting everything, but that's just how it turned out. It's a really fun costume to be in. And that brings us to the end of this video. Again, I do need to stress that because this is my first armor build, not everything I have done in this series is going to be the most efficient or the best way to do something. So please feel free to explore and look at different techniques. I sincerely hope that you guys will stick around for more cosplay content throughout the year. I'll be starting a new big cosplay very soon, however, I will not be updating you guys on that until about October. So please feel free to give me any video ideas for the meantime. I'll also be uploading small tutorials and advice videos throughout. Thank you again so much for joining me on this journey. Until next time, keep cosplaying.